Welcome to Morgan Stanley. We're in a very high floor here, but please disregard the view because in the interest of time, we've got 1 hour. So we want to hand it all over to Howard and to the AEO 2014. But my name is George Hopley. I'm with Morgan Stanley Commodities, and I'd like to welcome you to Morgan Stanley and to Columbia's Global Energy Policy hosting of the EIA 2014 Outlook. And I'll pass it off to Jordan to keep it brief, and he can introduce Howard.
Thanks for everyone for coming. My name is Jason Bordoff. I'm a professor at Columbia School of International Public Affairs and director of the Center on Global Energy Policy there. We only have 1 hour, and there's a lot in the AEO 2014 to get to. So I won't spend a lot of time introducing Howard Gruenspecht. He's the Deputy Administrator of the U.S. Energy Information Administration, has held that position for about 10 years. Before that was a senior staff economist at the Council of Economic Advisors and has held a host of other positions in government and academia, and is really one of the smartest, most thoughtful people that I've had the privilege of learning from over many years to better understand the energy space. And so I miss a lot of things about working in government, but near the top of that list is having the chance to spend lots of time each and every day talking with Howard and learning from him, and still get to do that on occasion, which I'm grateful for, and really grateful to have the opportunity this morning for all of us to learn from Howard and get a better sense of how EIA is thinking about the energy outlook. So please join me in welcoming Howard Gruenspecht. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jason, for the kind introduction. You're very much missed in Washington. I'd also like to thank George and Morgan Stanley for having us here. Actually, you can see my mother's apartment building out the window, but I'll try not to look. Have to go see her later today. But again, it's for those of you who don't know us, the Energy Information Administration is a statistical and analytical group within the Department of Energy. Sort of the mission is to provide data and analysis to inform policymakers, promote efficient markets. We do a lot of the, today at, I guess, 10:30 we'll release the weekly oil stuff. We do the weekly natural gas data. We do a lot of data products. And we also try to inform the public about energy and its relationship to the economy and the environment. We don't take positions on policy issues. So we're sort of like the Secretary of Energy, I guess, at Platts, who said he doesn't take positions on policy issues, but I really mean it. I won't do that. He meant it too, I assume. I'm not calling the Secretary. I'm getting myself off the track of where I wanted to go. But one of the things we do is put out long-term projections, in this case, going out to 2040. We do it on an annual basis, focusing on the U.S. economy. We also do an international outlook that does a global outlook. And the idea of this, we do something called a reference case, which is based on current laws and policies generally. Again, one thing, that's what I'm going to talk about today. One thing to keep in mind is that the full annual energy outlook includes a whole lot more than the reference case. Includes many alternative cases and recognition of the uncertainty involved in making projections about energy. I mean, Jason's very kind when he says he's learned a lot. I mean, because often you're kind of wrong all the time. You can be wrong for lots of reasons. Long-term projections, will always be wrong. Different market conditions in some of the key fuel markets, faster or slower economic growth and energy demand growth, which is in many cases tied to economic growth, changing policies and regulations. So many other people would try to actually sort of forecast what they think policymakers would do. For us, that's something that we don't do, because policymakers often come to us and say, what if we did this? And, there's I remember a commercial I watched when I was a kid, Tony running through the streets of Boston about spaghetti sauce. Does it have peppers. It's in there. So we wouldn't want to tell some person who said, what if we did this and that? And we'd say, oh, we assumed you did that already. No change in what we project. So changing consumer preferences. I mean, there are really some interesting questions about driving behavior, I think now. Vehicle miles of travel, whether that's changing. That's something we're starting to take a close look at. Faster or slower technology progress. And again, by technology, I'm speaking broadly. So sometimes there are technologies that are out there, like horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, but they're used together in a new way. So it's not like there's some new technology that was invented, but it's a practice, if you will, that can change things dramatically. And there can always be real technology breakthroughs. So there are a lot of ways to be wrong, but it's still useful, we think, to have sort of a consistent baseline way of looking at long-term energy future, and that's really the purpose of the annual energy outlook. So, these are sort of some of the key results. If there's a fire drill, at least you'll know the key results. We definitely see this growing domestic production of natural gas and oil, and it continues to reshape the U.S. economy. We can be actually more confident in the shorter run, but in the shorter run, we think crude oil production levels are going to approach the 1970 high to date of about 9.6 million barrels a day over the next 2 or 3 years. So that's how fast this thing is kind of moving along. Again, we have, at the same time, we're producing more hydrocarbons, liquid hydrocarbons and gas. We have light vehicle use falling off. We think natural gas will become even without new policies, so even without whether it's the greenhouse gas issues that EPA is actively looking at now for existing coal plants or other changes that might occur, extension of tax credits for certain renewable energy sources. Even without consideration of any of that, we expect natural gas to become the largest source of electric power generation, although it takes a while in our reference case for that to happen. One could imagine alternative scenarios, and we will have those where it occurs much, much sooner. We also have a lot of natural gas consumption, being used in industry. We have increased exports of both pipeline and liquefied natural gas. U.S. dependence on imported energy is falling over time. I mean, you need a day, not an hour, to discuss how important that is or isn't, but certainly we have that in this projection. And even without any policy actions, really beyond what current laws and regulations are, we don't see greenhouse gas emissions really growing significantly from their present value all the way out to 2040. And that reflects a couple of things. I mean, we have significant growth in the economy. I mean, the baseline projection is about a 2.4% annual rate of growth of GDP. That's with a lower population assumption than we used last time. We get our population estimates from census. So it's pretty strong growth in per capita income, but the energy intensity of the economy is falling at a pretty good clip. So energy use is growing only slowly, and on balance, the energy that we're using is still decarbonizing. And so the combination, it's really the decline in energy intensity, which is about a 2% rate, while the economy is growing at a sort of 2.4% rate. And at the same time, some decarbonization of energy gives you the flattish carbon dioxide emission projection. So that's sort of the overview. Again, this is just it's kind of amazing because I always think of energy systems as being very slow moving, and in some respects there are. So the energy mix doesn't really change that rapidly, but certainly production relative to consumption has changed a lot. In 2005, we don't show it in this picture, but I think we were about 30%, imported about 30% net of our BTUs, of our energy. And it's down to like 16% in 2012, and it's dropping like a rock still. And again, in the reference case, we expect it to drop further, to very small levels at the end of this period. Again, we're exporting a lot of natural gas. We're still, in this view, we're still net importers of oil, but we're exporting a lot of petroleum products, still importing crude, but exporting products. And again, the net import share is kind of falling dramatically. So this is oil. The tight oil thing is proceeding at a pretty amazing pace, and we're putting a lot more effort into tracking drilling productivity in the short run and drilling activity in the short run. That's enabled us to have a sort of a more current view of things. So in 2013 as a whole, I think crude oil production, is like 7.5 million barrels a day in the United States. But in December of 2013, it's 8 million barrels a day. So it's kind of like you're really on that very steep slope where, the last in 2012, it might have been 6.5 million barrels a day of domestic crude. This year, 7.5 million on average. Next year, kind of in the 8.5 million range, literally, from what we can see. And, we have it getting pretty quick up to that sort of past historical peak. In the reference case, it does decline starting in the next decade. It's really the decline of some of the currently identified resources, some of the sweet spots. I mean, you do have some technology progress. We have some trend technology progress going on in this, but the sort of the decline in some of the resources does begin to dominate, and things fall off a little bit in this case. But we are going to look at alternative scenarios involving faster technological progress or more resources or closer well spacing, even though with some of these tight wells, you can get to the point, like an engineer might say, we never want to get to the point where we're drilling wells so close that they're interfering with each other in terms of fracked wells. But in fact, on an economic basis, if you drill wells on 40 acres spacing instead of 80 acre spacing, and some companies are already talking about that in some of the most prolific areas, you may lose some, each well may be less productive, but it could be the right financial decision. So there's all kinds of different things we're going to look at, and certainly that downturn, might not occur in all the cases. This is demand, transportation demand in particular. The total delivered energy consumption for transportation in the reference case declines really over the projection. That's very different from history, where transportation energy demand was grown at a 1% annual rate, like for the, let's say, 40 years to 2012, from like 72 to 2012. There's a sharp drop in motor gasoline energy consumption, and that reflects, the much higher vehicle efficiency, and again, the fall off of vehicle miles of travel that I mentioned earlier. In the big picture, the majority of energy consumed in transportation by the end of the projection is still in the movement of people, and it's mostly motor gasoline and jet fuel. Although again, personal travel demand grows pretty slowly, at least for vehicles, but energy consumed in the movement of goods, mostly diesel and natural gas, grows relatively more due to robust sort of growth for moving things and more modest efficiency gains. So natural gas, unlike, I guess both of them are pretty amazing stories, but natural gas somewhat different from oil. We have natural gas in the production, growing throughout the projection period. Shale gas sort of began, in some sense, before shale oil, and I think we're somewhat more confident on the view of the resource, definitely being there. So we get, by the end of this period, we get over 100 billion cubic feet a day. So it is quite a significant increase in natural gas production. It's mostly dominated by shale. There's some other tight. Offshore, which used to be a very big part of our natural gas. It's hard to imagine, but non-associated offshore was like or the total offshore was like a quarter of our gas supply I guess 15, 20 years ago, and now it's a very small portion, which has all kinds of implications. So, again, this is the issue with power plants. 2012 was sort of an exceptional year. Gas prices were extremely low. That reflected, very rapid production growth and an exceptionally warm winter in the 2011-2012 winter. And, the only place for gas to go, effectively, there's some pipeline exports, but, at this point, although it's coming, but there's no opportunity to slough it, if you will, offshore. So the place where you balance natural gas markets in today's North America is in the electric power sector. And the price of natural gas came down to like $2, two and a little bit a million BTU. Actually, it fell below $2 a million BTU for, in the spring of 2012. And that definitely changed the dispatch order of power plants, and you had that real dip in coal-fired generation. This year, coal-fired generation is up a little bit. Natural gas prices are higher. It's what you'd expect. You notice we have a secondary dip in the coal picture, and that is the MATS, some of the EPA environmental regulations that will lead a significant amount of coal capacity, we think, will shut down rather than incur the capital costs of upgrading. But you can see that from that point forward, we think the economics, I guess in our reference case at least, of coal-fired generation for the plants that remain are actually very strong. And effectively, that line that looks almost flat for coal is full utilization of the existing plants that remain after, roughly full utilization of the existing capacity that remains after the MATS rule goes into effect. So that's the story on generation. We don't have very fast electricity demand growth. It's one of the things that is driving utilities a little crazy in this country. I could tell you about all the things we've been wrong about over history. One of the things I think we were right about is maybe 5-6 years ago, we start to come to the view that electricity demand growth is really likely to be lower rather than higher. And we got into some of the electric utility groups or NERC, which does reliability planning. They had a hard time kind of accepting that. It was like, oh no, electricity is going to grow kind of with GDP as it did for a period of time, and they expected that to continue. And I think now, more people are seeing it, modest electricity demand growth. We have under 1% electricity demand growth in this outlook. And again, in that case, there are probably both downside and upside possibilities. Could be lower than that. But natural gas generation creeps up. It is the generation that's the preferred economically under current laws and policies. So the renewable tax credits expire, there's no carbon policy. In that kind of world, natural gas is going to be supplying the incremental generation. This is manufacturing natural gas use. And certainly in the short term, we see a pretty big boost there. Specific industries are going to benefit from the greater availability of natural gas at relatively low prices. There's a lot of growth in chemicals, that the pink area. I don't know why we made chemicals pink this year. After 2025, we think some of that actually does, there's still growth, but it kind of falls off. So there's no doubt that we have better gas prices than, like, certainly right now in terms of dispatching if you think of the global, some of these bulk commodities that move around the world as like a globally dispatched industry, like the electric system, you're sure going to want to dispatch your U.S. plants ahead of, chemical plants ahead of those in Europe or Japan, certainly to the extent that you can. But the real question is, and certainly now, there's a lot of talk and a lot of action, I think, in building new capacity in the U.S. But over time, we do have gas prices rising in our reference case. And that leads us to, the place where you're going to build these maybe after 2025. The issue is not, are you going to build it in Europe or Japan, but are you going to build it someplace closer to some stranded gas? And that's really what we have. So the U.S., gets a big boost in the gas-intensive industries, certainly at the front end. It continues to grow, but at some point, as our gas creeps up in real terms to $5, $6, and in our framework, people are always looking ahead. They're not looking at the current gas price when they build. They're looking at the gas price over the life of the plant. And when the U.S. gas price starts to look like 6 or 7, as it does in our reference case, then I think the attraction of building this kind of stuff in the U.S. Goes down somewhat. This one here is natural gas trade, a topic of great interest in Washington, probably great interest everywhere. I guess increasingly being eclipsed by the talk about oil trade. But so we have a fair amount of exports in this world. There's a lot of focus on the LNG, but we have a lot of pipeline exports to Mexico. We have pipeline exports to Canada. We also have pipeline imports from Canada. There's two-way trade in gas with Canada. But, we have our gross exports in this framework getting up, between 20 and 25 BCF a day. So that by the end of this period, by, 2025, we have a pretty significant, 15 BCF a day. Again, a significant amount of LNG exports, certainly not everything that has been proposed, but not constrained by the existing, what licenses have conditionally been approved. We have, this is again petroleum products, not crude oil, and we both import and export petroleum products, and we'll continue to both import and export them. Like the motor gasoline imports, generally, the view is good here. I think it's over there someplace. In New York Harbor is where most of the petroleum product imports come into the United States. At the same time, we're exporting a tremendous amount of petroleum products out of other parts of the country. And we expect petroleum product exports to grow. The black line there is the net petroleum product exports. You'll notice that we came from being a pretty big net importer to being a net exporter presently. We expect to be a somewhat larger net exporter, but we don't expect a lot of merchant refining capacity to be built in the United States. There'll be round outs, the usual kind of things that people have been doing in the past. So effectively, the growth in our net exports is somewhat constrained by, our ability to raise the utilization rate of existing refining, and that's running very high now because it's a very good way to make money. Cheap gas to fuel your refinery, cheap oil relative to what other people pay to refine. It's like a golden age, I think, for some of the refiners. But the utilization rates are already quite high, so you have a limited opportunity there. And you have some opportunity to increase exports as U.S. demand falls off, as showed you earlier. So that black line does go up, but It's not like people are building, new greenfield merchant refineries to export products. And this is carbon. So I already described to you, it's pretty flat. Again, energy use has not grown very much, and it's decarbonizing a little bit. Whether this is, again, we don't do policy, but, obviously I think there are many people who want to do much, want that curve to go down a lot. In our view of the world, you're going to have to do something beyond current laws and policies to make that happen. We could stop there and talk if you guys want to talk, or we could I could filibuster, a good Washington thing to do. But let's stop there and talk, and maybe some of the other ones can come up, as people raise questions. How about that?
So
yes, sir.
You
want to do that?
Yeah, we have microphones that will go around. We'll take questions. Please identify yourself. Keep your questions brief. Did you want to kick it off? Do you have a question?
Yeah,
do you want to
I have one quick question, and it's a great process and discipline to go through. And one of my things that I like to do is to look at year over year what changed from your 2013 outlook. And one of the most interesting dynamics has been that rate of going to less reliance on imports or greater export potential, both in gas,
and oil.
And oil.
Right.
But I was wondering what struck you this time when you went through the whole process. Was there something that kind of kicked out from what the outlook was officially in 2013 to what you're presenting today?
Well, it's interesting because Adam Szyminski is the administrator. I'm the deputy administrator. We have a lot of people who work on energy data, but we have a staff of people who work on energy analysis, and they have their ideas. And it's a federal government agency. It's not a private sector agency, or private sector body. So we don't impose our ideas on the professional staff, but we do challenge them a lot. And we certainly in the area of oil production, we have, been certainly looking at that very closely, and that's
More granular analysis on that kind of short term.
Yeah, we just want to make sure we really kind of get what's going on and have some of the analysts out more if we can. One of the reasons we hold an annual energy conference, two reasons. One is to sort of float some issues, but the other one, it's a very important, I think, training thing for some of that. You don't want to live inside of your model, I don't think.
Echo chamber.
Well, I think models and common sense are sort of like, I think of models as like bionics, because even if you think you're very good at thinking about all the connections, there are so many connections. I think what Herb Simon said, most things you could keep in your mind at once were 7 or something, and they're clearly more than that. So having a model that gives you some rigorous accounting is a good thing. And sometimes the model can teach you things, like you get some result and you say, I didn't expect that, but then you look into it and you say, oh, I see what's happening here. But other times, you need to say, well, the way this modeling structure is built just doesn't make, a lot of sense. So the question of, for instance, how domestic crudes are going to be priced under various, again, we're not doing policy on these things, but domestically, if we're not going to export stuff beyond, let's say, Canada and the things that we already do, then the question is, how do you determine the prices of domestic crudes? And, we for a long time have had this, or a short time, but for several years, a long time, I guess, the WTI was depressed, relative to Brent because of transportation, bottlenecks in the mid-continent. I think people understood that. But like Louisiana Sweet was kind of very close to Brent. Coastal crudes that weren't subject to those bottlenecks were very close. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, I think if you look back at some of our stuff, there was some anticipation of this, but all of a sudden, but dramatically, I think in September of this year, all of a sudden you had, LLS and WTI trending together, well below Brent. And then the question is, well, what's going to determine the price of North American crudes? Then you have to go back and have, refinery models. What's going to make, if indeed this stuff has to stay in North America, what's going to make, people want to use it,
Right.
because people have built refineries that do very well with other crudes, and then the question and also produce a lot of distillate, which is worth a lot more than gasoline in today's world. So there's all these questions about how the models do things. There's I guess modeling is a subset of analysis,
Right.
and sometimes we have to convince our modelers of that. The model says so is not a good answer, but it's a real challenge.
No, that's good.
So
good
we
comment.
have exactly a half hour for questions. We're going to end at 9:30 sharp. Let me ask one, and then we'll open it up to the group. Maybe bring the mic here to the front row so the gentleman in the front can go first, and then we'll just pass it around. I wanted to ask, there'll be more questions, I'm sure, about crude oil exports. I had a question about LNG exports. So 2 years ago, EIA released a study of what LNG exports at different volumes might do to different aspects of the U.S. economy, including prices. That was based on the Annual Energy Outlook 2011. So now 3 years later, in terms of our annual energy outlooks, I'm just wondering directionally if you have a sense, given what we've seen over the last 3 years in terms of the shape of the domestic supply curve, what kind of production levels are expected, what you think for natural gas, just directionally how you think that might look different today in terms of what the impacts would be, where they would be higher, where they might be lower.
Thank you. My good friend. That's what people in the Senate say when they're
When they don't want to answer questions.
No, actually, when they're really mad at someone, they say, "My very good friend." Then you know they're really best. But Jason, my very good friend. But, no, seriously, I just can't. But seriously, I think we have I think our view of the elasticity of the natural gas supply curve. Although I want to point out, although we're constantly asked this, we don't have a parameter in our model that is the elasticity of the natural gas supply curve. But because we have much more of a process type model, this is what a drilling rig can do. This is how we really track the behavior of individual wells actually in the new wells that are drilled. But there's an applied elasticity, and I can tell you that that our view of the supply of natural gas is that it's more elastic than we had previously, which means that if you did a thought experiment of a delta, a change in demand, whether it be export demand or some other kind of demand, and how much price would have to rise to bring forth the supply to satisfy that demand, probably our supply curve is flatter, and that would be the biggest kind of change. So we have prices, there's some dynamics over time, but the prices in this thing end up sort of close to where they were by the end they're close to where they were in last year's projection, but the actual amount of supply associated with that is much higher. We weren't really at the 100 BCF a day kind of supply level in 2040 last time around. So we have more domestic use in power, we have more domestic use in industry. As I've shown, we have bigger pipeline exports and bigger LNG exports, and all those things, the supply-demand balance is at a much higher, crossing point in quantity, but yet the prices are kind of similar. And the other thing is and people who follow gas closely, there's been a lot of talk about a lot of things, but some of the, let's say when gas prices are real, or even where they are now or lower as they were, there had been talk about, it's only the liquids that are keeping this thing afloat, and the dry gas can't make it economically. And yet, if you look in some of the places, I guess the new pipeline comes in right over here too.
Yeah, right
down there someplace. But
village.
But if you look at some of the dry gas areas in the in the northeast part of the Marcellus, some of these individual wells is unbelievable, and they are making money, and they're producing, they can produce dry gas and make money in today's market even. Easily. So as we learn more from the data, we're making adjustments, but that's one of the bigger adjustments.
That's great. Thank you. Here in the front row, please. Did you want to call on people, or you want me to do it?
No, you do it.
Okay.
I love having an assistant.
You're a very good friend. We'll call on people.
You're a very good friend.
My name is Ron Coan. I'm director at Clean Tech Quarter, which is a not-for-profit promoting clean tech opportunities. I'm trying to understand why the EIA believes that emissions will remain flat when all around us we see a ramping up production, and you're pointing out an increase in production. What accounts for your thinking of that?
So production's, I mean, when I think of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, I think of them as, I mean, obviously there are these questions about fugitive methane emissions from wells, which is, again, you could spend 3 days on that. But the carbon dioxide emissions from combustion, I'm thinking actually relate to energy consumption in some sense. If we're let's say producing natural gas and exporting it by pipeline to Mexico, the emissions from combusting that natural gas are Mexico's, not ours. And this is our view of energy consumption. And we're I mean, it's very funny because sometimes, like, certain people come to us and say, like, and again, I don't know what we believe or don't believe, but there's a lot of energy intensity improvement in this baseline, a lot of efficiency. Sometimes efficiency people say, like, where's efficiency? And I look at this thing and I'm thinking, we got this economy growing at a 2.4% rate, and your energy use at the end of this period is barely, what it was in 2007. I mean, we don't even get back to 2007 level of total energy consumption until like, I guess it looks like about 2020. So, we just don't have, I guess I think of emissions as being associated with total energy use, and then the question is, are you decarbonizing or getting more carbon intensive? And again, we're not using, our coal thing is kind of falling off, which is the, I don't say worst, but it's certainly the highest carbon per BTU. And then our oil and other liquids, which is mostly oil, second highest, is really falling off dramatically. So the total energy is not growing that much, and the mix is decarbonizing. And those are the two things that work together, I think.
Just behind this gentleman and then here in the front row.
All right. Given the expectation of relatively low gas prices, what is holding gas and LNG back from growing as a transportation fuel beyond 3%? I find that number surprisingly low.
Yeah, it certainly could be higher. I mean, and we're certainly, let me try to find a good one here for that. We have the buses that you see all. We have some in trucking. Although again, one thing to keep in mind, it's not just, we actually have a fair amount in freight rail. Marine's pretty small, but freight rail, and people are following it. There's a lot of work going on there. But in trucking, there's two things. One, there's just there are always these chicken and egg issues, which you got to have the fueling stations, you got to have and that's always an issue in some of these policies. And there are no policies here, by the way. There's no Pickens plan. There's no tax credits. There's no anything built in. So what we're getting is just economically driven. But the vehicle actually costs a lot more. So yes, you save on the fuel, but you do have a significantly higher capital cost for the vehicle. And it's also the case that in trucking, it's not like my personal expertise, but there's a question of trucks can be either, they're subject to both weight and length restrictions. And trucks can be either, in some cases, they can be weighted out. So it turns out that the tanks you need for, basically the tank you need for diesel fuel is like a tin can. And the tanks you need for LNG is somewhat heavier than a tin can. And it's also a lot more expensive than a tin can, which is the point I made earlier. But to the extent that it's heavy, the expense you could overcome if you say, gee, what I put into this heavier thing is so much cheaper than diesel that I want to do it. And we think some people will want to do it. But for other people, if they have to carry less in their truck because they're subject to weight restrictions, then it's not such a hot deal for them. Or the other folks, people who are carrying boxes of popcorn, they don't have weight problems. You could carry a big trailer of popcorn and it wouldn't have a weight problem. But those guys, the volume matters a lot to them. And for some of these alternative technologies, like CNG tanks and stuff, putting those behind the cab, subject to a length restriction, is going to cost you volume. So there are like a lot of details. You could certainly imagine, and again, it's not like we're saying could never be more than this. The rail is kind of interesting because they have more of an opportunity to do the whole thing inside the fence in some respects. And there are really only 4 big railroads the 4 major Class 1 railroads in the country. And at least 2 of them are very seriously looking at this. There's also issues, frankly, with LNG and boil off. So I don't know if you drive down the road and you pass the rest area and people are kind of sleeping, in the truck. I mean, a lot of them have bed, potentially a bunk in them. And LNG may not, there's some issues about that, about things being idle. There's issues about, LNG in a refueling station. Do you have to keep on dealing with the issue of boil off? So there are kind of a whole lot of technical questions, but it's certainly on a dollars per BTU basis, diesel fuel is about $25 a million BTU, and natural gas, as your question suggests, is a whole lot less. Now, what natural gas would be after you liquefy it and deliver it to the places along the road where people need to refuel it, and there's probably not going to be self-service at the natural gas at the LNG refueling station. So after you pay the guy to sort of be there, and it may not be a teenager, so it'll be higher. I think it'll still be a lot cheaper than diesel fuel. I'm not, but it's those kinds of issues that sometimes we don't think about, in that people say, natural gas $4 a million BTU, diesel's $25 a million BTU, no brainer. Everybody, is going to be using, and again, we have people using it, but it's these types of issues that come up. But certainly could be more than this, and certainly if there was a policy to incent it, it could be more. But again, we don't build that in.
In the front, and then we'll go to the back.
Hi, good morning. Ksenia Sholkovska, Columbia University Sustainability Management Program. And could you please refer back to the previous slide and look at renewables? I'm just curious as to why your estimate is so conservative.
Conservative? I never know what conservative means.
Well, relatively
I guess as I get older, what does Winston Churchill say? If you don't get more conservative as you get older, you get a bad thing. But no, let's go. Let's. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to find an electricity slide.
Just given the prices, improving technology and the potential, and I'm pretty sure the actual implementation of climate change legislature.
Well, that's something we for us, that we would not make any assumptions. Clearly, in a world where there was a price on carbon and things, and certainly if it would rise a lot, you'd see a lot more of it. But again, we have this very slow electricity demand growth. This is the historical thing. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I mean, I grew up, uptown here when I was a kid, back at the beginning of this graph. So U.S. electricity demand was growing 10 or 12%, a year, which meant that if it's growing 12% a year, that's extreme. It means that load is doubling every 6 years, right? And now we're down someplace else. Well, when load is growing, you need new stuff. They're going to build something new. I guess when I was a kid, they built Big Alice. They ALLIS. It was Alice Chalmers in Ravenswood in Queens, I think. But you had to build tremendous amounts of stuff. They built Indian Point 1, 2, and 3. You're just building all the time. So when you're building all the time, you're competing what I call new versus new. You got to build something, otherwise the lights are going to go out. And if you're building new versus new, you're looking at the capital and operating costs of, let's say, technology A, and you're looking at the capital and operating costs of technology B, okay? And you're kind of looking, that's a reasonable way to think about it. And renewables look very attractive, maybe, in that world. Although the other issues of intermittency and other things, but put that aside. But if you're in this world where electricity demand isn't growing, then absent policy, right, the cost of running your existing stuff is the cost of fueling it. And so while on a sort of capital and operating cost to capital and operating cost basis, renewables might be very attractive. And if indeed, we were here, you might find a lot of people saying, yeah, that's what I'm going to build. That's the, if you're down here and you can basically serve your load with your existing stuff, then it's only going to be attractive to build new stuff if the capital and operating cost of the new is lower than the operating cost of the old. That is a very tough deal. So, I mean, that's it gives you a thought of that. But actually, we have renewables. So this is the renewables. We do have renewables growing in this thing. I mean, pretty significantly. I mean, it's meeting a fair amount, because electricity load's not growing that much. Actually, it's renewables and natural gas that are supplying, more than all the growth. If you look at the top two pieces, if you look from 2012 on, all of the growth is coming from natural gas and renewables, and a significant amount is coming from renewables. But so I don't know. You might not be convinced. I might not be convinced either. But that's there is a, when you start talking about, there'll be policy. You may well be right, but that's deliberately not put in here. So when someone says, what if we did X, you can change this a lot.
There were some hands in the back. The gentleman on the aisle here.
Yeah, my name is Bob Wyman. I wonder if you could go a little bit farther into the non-fossil fuels, the renewables. Depending on the sources one reads, it looks like things like solar and wind are ramping up very rapidly. And there's at the moment, there's no real hint of them falling off. But if your numbers are correct, essentially those industries are going to be very disappointing very quickly. So where's the disconnect?
Well, if you want to talk about my numbers being correct, I hopefully have made no bones about this. The ones to the left of that 2012 line, they are correct. I mean, and the ones to the right of the 2012 line, I haven't said they're correct. I've said that under current laws and policies. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of what has been driving, so let's start to the left of the 2012 line, what we might call facts. I should have gone to law school. That has been supported by some pretty, significant policies like production tax credits, like investment tax credits, like under the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, by very large loan guarantees, by opportunities to accelerate your production tax credits so you don't only get it when you produce, but you can get them all up front when the market for tax equity kind of fell apart a little bit. So all of that, but again, I'm just talking about to the left of the picture. All of that growth, is very, arguably is significantly impacted by policy. And it's no accident that we have continued growth on sort of the same track that we are on, at least, you notice there's like a bend in the curve there. And the bend in the curve there reflects to some extent when the policies that are currently in law wear out. So they extended the production tax credit for wind for 1 year, but they changed the basis. It used to be you had to bring the wind capacity into operation by the end of the period, or you didn't get it. Now it's, for this last extension, they said you have to start construction before the end of the period or you don't get it. So things like Cape Wind, I read a news article yesterday, apparently they started construction. So they're going to lock in some sense their, but so we still have some effect of these policies. But again, under our current laws and policies thing, we don't assume that they're going to be extended. If the current law says it's over in 2016 for 30% investment tax credit for solar, in our modeling, it's over in 2016. Now, it may well be the case that it'll be extended, just like it may well be the case that the country would undertake a greenhouse gas policy. All kinds of things could happen and would change these things. But again, under that kind of framework of what we're trying to do, And given, I won't repeat the whole story about slow electricity growth and demand, that those two things together sort of significantly constrain how well this stuff does. I mean, so that is the underlying what is there. I mean, that's the best I can do.
Other questions? We have about 10 more minutes left. Yeah, please.
Hi, sir. I want to ask something about LNG's export. We all know that this year, DOE has approved 3 projects for LNG export, and plus additional Sabine Pass export approved. There are 4 projects this year. The total capacity is more than 6 BCF per day, and still there are more than 20 project is waiting for the approval. So I want to know the DOE's attitude towards LNG's export. Just now I saw the picture. There's only 2 BCF per day export capacity. So
I think there's more than 2 BCF a day, but let me go back to that picture. That was my hope that we could kind of use these. Yeah, so the BCF a day is, first of all, the left-hand side scale is TCF a year, and the right-hand side scale is BCF a day. Think of multiplying TCF a year by 3 to get BCF a day, roughly. So we actually have, it's something like and I think we actually tried to show in there in what things looked like in 2025. We had a total of, 14.8, 15 BCF a day of total gross exports, of which looks like to me like LNG is more than half. If you look at the line in 2025, it looks like to me about 8 BCF a day of exports, and then with the we again, and our model loves Alaska. It wants to build a terminal in Alaska. I don't know whether whether it's going to happen or not, but not a pipeline to the States. I mean, it wants to build not to the lower 48. Alaska is a state. I don't want Senator Murkowski on me, but it wants to. You like that, huh? That's a good one. There could be more exports, frankly. But I think one of the issues, and this is one of the harder things, and it's one of the things that I am personally struggling with, is let's say natural gas markets and petroleum product markets become more globally integrated. I guess the real question is how much, a lot of what happens here is going to be determined by what's going on in the rest of the world. I mean, if you kind of assume that, Asia is going to have, oil-linked natural gas, LNG prices forever, then I think it's fair to say that the demand for you could print money by exporting LNG from the United States to Asia. But the issue is, at what point does that model kind of change globally? By model, I don't mean like computer model. I mean the framework of natural gas competition change globally. At what point do you move to, I guess, what I would call gas-on-gas competition becomes more prevalent throughout the world? And then the question is, how does the U.S. potential for export look relative to, let's say, stranded gas in other parts of the world, like in Mozambique or someplace like that? And again, in our view of the world, or the reference case view of the world, I want to be clear, because we do look at other scenarios, but in the reference case view of the world, I think somewhere here I have something to do with that was the one, something to do with prices. I mean, the gas prices in the U.S., they are kind of rising, and they get to 6 and 7, and when the U.S. prices get to 6 and 7, in the middle here, and someone building an LNG plant that's going to buy gas off the U.S. spot market for 20 years after they build it, these people are going to be thinking, this might not be the best place to do this. So, one can easily just add up the number of applications, but it's kind of hard. I mean, there's a market aspect to this as well. Not a great answer, but I just think we're struggling with it because a lot of this will depend, this U.S. natural gas, when it gets between 5 and 8, what's nice about the U.S. natural gas, what's nice about the U.S. natural gas is that it's kind of, you don't have to develop the natural gas with the liquefaction plant because you have a market there that's broad and deep. But at some point, like virtually, I don't want to call it free gas, but gas that's really stranded, that has no value unless you attach it or liquefy it and put it somewhere in a tanker. The question is that going to beat the U.S.? And then the other question is, as the price being paid in some of these Asian markets breaks away from oil, that at some point, a way of thinking about it, you have the U.S. price plus the cost of the liquefaction plant plus the cost of the fuel that you need to run the liquefaction plant plus the cost of transport. And I guess the question is, if you think the U.S. price is going to be $7 at the Henry Hub, and then you add those other costs on top of it to get it to Asia, then the question is, do you really think the price in Asia is going to be high enough to make that an economic proposition? So it's tough, I will say that. And I'm not saying we know hopefully what you should have learned from this is that having been wrong so many times, I would never say, we know. That's why I draw this distinction between what's on the left-hand side of the 2012 line and what's on the right-hand side of the 2012 line. But, what's important is to think about the things in sort of a consistent way. And I really would encourage looking at some of the other, the other cases, which I think are in many respects as interesting as this one or more, because they teach you different things.
I'm surprised we haven't gotten an oil export question yet, so let me quickly ask one, which is not
my very good friend.
Just an analytic question, not a policy question. But you mentioned how LLS and Brent had kind of been really close together, and they've since broken apart a couple months ago, and I think it's about $8 now. I'm just wondering if you could speak to the factors behind that. Is this temporary things like refinery maintenance and other things, or are we starting to see the point where refineries in the Gulf Coast really are demanding that discount to take more LLS, Brent, and sort of the issue that is, that the crude oil export policy brings to the fore is sort of here now, and people are going to have to kind of deal with it, pretty soon?
I don't know that people have to deal with anything.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to figure out what's motivating that spread. The change.
The Nile is more than a river in Egypt.
The change in that close relationship between LLS and Brent. What's driving that?
I think that may be permanently changed. I think maybe permanently is a strong word here. Don't invite me back 100 years from now. But there are some short-term things going on. So the refinery, there is a seasonality in the refinery industry and turnaround in the refinery industry, which definitely had some impact. That was one of the things we identify. Another thing is the fact that production is rising at this sort of pretty incredible kind. It's like the kind of thing that drives our modelers kind of crazy, but like it's real. We make them deal with it because it's like reality. It's like you can't just say it isn't because it is. But production going up, gives you more of this stuff around. And the other thing is some of the adjustments that are being made to accommodate transport the new stuff has actually involved like reversals of some pipelines and things. So in particular, in this particular case, there's a pipeline called the Ho-Ho pipeline that goes from Louisiana to Texas and usually used to carry LLS from east to west. And there's not a lot of need to carry light sweet crude from east to west when you have the Eagle Ford and the Permian and whatever going on. So the owner of that, in fact, what's really going on in this country right now is that people are struggling to find ways to transport oil from west to east. So people are being creative. So the people who own this pipeline said, gee, we're going to reverse the pipeline. So they shut it down to reverse it. And as soon as they shut it down to reverse it, that had a pretty significant effect on the LLS, market balance, if you will. That's one of the. So there are particular things that happen, but that's not going to be reversed again. If anything, there's more, the oil in the West or Eagle Ford in Texas. I call it the West. It's not the West. It's the sort of, if you think of the Gulf Coast, it's going down the coast from Louisiana down to Port Arthur, down to Houston. I mean, there's a lot of oil coming into Corpus Christi now that they're actually moving in barges, and tankers, and coastwise shipping in the United States is not cheap, but it's because of various regulatory requirements that we won't discuss unless you're my very, very, very good friend. But it's tough, and people are moving this stuff, and it's having all kinds of impacts. Like some of these, ships, also like there have been ships that have been used to carry gasoline from the Gulf Coast to Florida. And now there's competition for those ships, people to move oil from Corpus Christi to, and then the question is, so maybe Florida gets its gasoline in a different way than it used to get it. And there's just incredible amount of mind-numbing detail that, that goes on in these things. But I think with production, if production's rising anything like that, that kind of curve, and at the same time you have, I think, more oil coming down from Canada, over the next year even, it may be I think if I had a bet, I always try to when my staff, when we're fighting about things, I always try to turn this, into the classic, one person cuts and the other person picks, so I try to say when they make a case for something, that should be a certain way. I'll say, do you want the under or the over on this? And I'm trying to line up as much beer and pizza as I can when I retire, because I'm in the crappy federal retirement plan. But, it's very tough. It's very tough. But I would say if I had to take the under over on whether WTI and LLS are going to stay together, I'd take they stay together.
Great. We are out of time, unfortunately. I wish we could go longer with Howard. Let me say 3 quick words of thanks and then turn over to George. First, I want to thank Morgan Stanley again for hosting us. We try to do most of our events at the Center on Global Energy Policy up at Columbia, but I understand the prospect of going that far north along the west side is a barrier for some folks, so we try to do things in Midtown too. And one of the great things about building the center in New York is not only that we're part of one of the world's great universities, but we are in the world's home of energy finance and capital markets and commodity markets. So we want to make sure that we're interacting with lots of folks like the people in this room as much as possible. So you've been a great friend and supporter in helping us host those kind of events in Midtown, and we appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for being here this morning, and then finally I want to thank Howard Gruenspecht for your insights and for traveling to New York to be with us. I
would just like to add that we look forward to more future 2015 and beyond AEO.
It'll be completely different.
And more events with Jason's team as well. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.